Good evening. My name's Isabel Whiteleg. I'm Head of Public Programmes here at Nottingham Contemporary, and I'm going to keep my introduction very brief as we have a full programme this evening. As you will have gathered, the idea for this day of events was provoked by a frequently commented upon aspect of the work of Tala Madani, which is on display upstairs, that she's a woman who has predominantly, at least in her work to date, depicted men. In order to understand why or if the depiction of men by women should be significant, we've returned to a landmark exhibition dedicated to this subject, Women's Images of Men, which opened at the ICA in 1980 before travelling to a series of UK venues. Conceived as a second part to Women's Images of Men, the exhibition About Time, featuring less traditional media, video, performance, slide tapes and installations, was proposed and co-curated by the artists Rose Garrard and Catherine Elwes. For this part, we've invited Catherine to curate a programme of short films dating from the 80s and 90s, which address the theme of women's images of men. I'm therefore delighted to introduce Catherine Elwes to introduce this programme. A practising artist widely known for her groundbreaking work in video, Catherine Elwes is a Professor of Moving Image Art at the University of the Arts London and the founder-editor of the Moving Image Review and Art Journal. The film programme is approximately 30 minutes in total. We're hoping to preserve a small break, 5 to 10 minutes, in case anyone needs to pop out quickly and come back. But as the discussion programme also has a lot involved in it, we'd really like to start promptly at 7 for that part. But I will hand over now to Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us down today. It's been such a fantastic day so far, so bodes well for the rest of the evening. I want to say just a few things about women's involvement in moving image practices and performance in this period of the late 70s and early 80s. There was a general dissatisfaction with painting and sculpture, with the plastic arts, because many women felt that it was over-determined, that it was overly weighed down by the history of male practice going back centuries. And so women started to look around for new media that they could work with. And performance and film was already very much a chosen medium for women, but video came on stream in about 1965, and that made a big difference to all of us. We may have got rid of some of the history of male art by embracing video and performance, but certainly we were taking on other traditions, which is film, mainstream film, television, theatre, vaudeville. There was a whole new series of problems to work with, but at the same time there was that feeling that somehow or other there was more space within these disciplines for us to begin to explore what it meant to be a woman in the late 1970s and early 80s. One of the big advantages for video was that you didn't need a crew. And a lot of women were working from home. They were working out of a domestic space. And video technology was unbelievably and wonderfully simple compared with film. It had one other enormous advantage, and that was that you could get an instant feedback from the image. So it was really more like drawing than painting. I always thought of it as a kind of drawing process. You could see what you'd done. The best thing about it was that you could also then rub it out and start all over again. So it was a very, very immediate medium. I started to work in video because for me performance was problematic, because I didn't feel it was one of the reasons that performance artists began to make live work was precisely because it was unpredictable, because there were chance elements operating, there was the potential of interacting with an audience, you never quite knew what was going to happen. And that's the reason I stopped doing it, really, and turned to video, where I felt that I had much greater control over the image that I was presenting to an audience. I could edit my presentation, my means of being visible. Most feminists working in film and video concentrated on issues of female representation, and not many artists approached the issue of men, how to represent men. And that's why About Time didn't follow the theme of images of men, because women were simply not doing it. However, when Isabel suggested that I might put this programme together, I did in fact find some works that began to think about images of men. And my impression or my observation is that, as in as with much of the work in Women's Images of Men, a lot of what we see here, with a couple of exceptions, is really about relationship. It's about the relationship of an individual man to a specified woman who is the maker of the tape. So that I don't think that there was this kind of reversal whereby women objectified men in the same way that they had been objectified. And Lisa Tickner has some very interesting arguments about why that's actually structurally impossible, and maybe we can talk about that later on. I'm going to just briefly run through what you're going to see this evening. The first piece is called Perfect Leader, from 1983 by Max Almy, an American. And it's a portrait of a generic politician engaged in the exaggerated gestures of political rhetoric. And this piece was made just before the 1984 presidential campaign, so you'll see that the politician on screen is very much like Kennedy, who was, as you know, the first telegenic politician, the person who realized the importance of how you present yourself on television. She also uses what were then the latest graphic, sort of video graphics, computer graphics with a driving soundtrack. This is really when video promos were beginning to grow as a and become increasingly important in the promotion of video. So she uses that aesthetic. The second piece is by me, and it's called The Gunfighters, from 85. I made the work because my son was turning about 1 or 2, and he started waving his spoon around and going bang bang, and I was one of these incredibly anxious mothers who was determined that my son would not play war games, and I was worried about the influence of his cousin who would come in and start with his toy guns. So I decided to make a work about my nephew and our neighbour and their war and their gun games, their gunfights, and asked them to recreate a gunfight. But it's also about about the relationship between the interviewer and the interviewee, and the ways in which they actually managed to avoid answering any of my questions. The next piece is by Lisa Steele. It's called The Ballad of Dan Peoples. This goes right back to 1976. It's an ethnographic work. Steele delves into her family history, which is seeking her own identity within her ancestry. She recreates her grandfather's voice in a kind of act of ventriloquism, and she holds a framed photograph of her grandfather on her lap, and most of the time the lights obliterate, the reflection from the lights obliterate the image, but he does come into focus towards the end. She uses a device, a very interesting device, I think, which is she creates a self-reflexive distance between herself and her grandfather and us by using a repetitive rhythmic chant, which is fascinating, I think. And it's something that quite a number of women did at that time, was to take a form like speech and turn it into something very slightly different, which had the effect of putting it at a distance, but also made it, I think, much more resonant. So see what you think about that one. Kate Adams, 2004, New Year's Day. This piece is about the relationship between her and her son Paul, who suffers complex neurological impairment. And the work questions, as does all of her work, questions the societal notions of normality and the way that disability is presented in the culture. I was moved by the invisible link that seemed to exist between them in this piece. Kate and the camera become like an anchor, and Paul launches off into the world of sensations. You see him on the beach, there's the wind, the sun, but he constantly returns to his mother. And she wrote to me yesterday, and she said, although the days of loving endurance and alienation have passed, I miss the sheer intensity of those moments of parallel world intimacy he and I shared. He has enigmatically matured and seems so boyishly youthful on the beach. Then Kerith Wynne Evans, he's my token male in this programme. Very interesting piece called The Kim Wilde Auditions from 1996. I think he answers the question, is it possible to make a sexist, objectified image of the male body? And I think you can judge, and you must tell me whether you think that he does in this work. I'll give you quickly what the context is. Kim Wilde, if you remember, was a pop singer at the time. I think she's a gardening sort of guru now. And she was making promotional videos for her songs, And this was an audition for the next Kim Wilde video. And various young men came along and had to remove their shirts in order to audition for the video. And it makes, in my view, very uncomfortable viewing. But again, I'll be interested to hear what you think. Mouth to Mouth by Smith and Stewart. They made a series of works exploring the relationship between the two of them. And I think that in their work, man is definitely not positioned as the enemy. I think that the work is about a delicately balanced interdependence between the two of them. But there's a wonderful tension in this work. And again, I won't describe it too much for fear of spoiling it. So I hope that you enjoy the programme and be very happy to discuss it with you afterwards. Thank you.